Hello everyone, it's Mr. Wolfe here, and in this video I'm going to be going over modeling biomolecules. So this would be a helpful video if you were absent the day we went over this in class, or if you were in class and you just want some time to go over it again, because I know that right away it is a lot of stuff. Okay, so the first thing is before we even get to the modeling problems, let's look at the guide. And the guide is just supposed to be a nice one-stop shop for a lot of the information that you're going to be used, but don't necessarily need to know. So for instance, with the human body, here are all things that might come into play with a scenario in terms of your muscles using glycogen, right? This gives you information about what the muscles do and how they might use glycogen actually. Same thing with all the other organs as well. So again, you don't need to memorize this stuff, but you're going to need to use this context, so the guide should be helpful for that. Same thing with the plant, right? Just tells you parts of the plant, what they're responsible for, and that'll help you give some insight when you look at a specific new scenario right over here. All right, so on a test, you would actually have this. On an exam, you're not going to exactly have this. We're not going to tell you that this is a polysaccharide and this is a monosaccharide, but we'll probably give you the shapes and everything, just so you don't have to memorize completely. This backside, which I just have printed out right here, so this is just the key to this page. This you wouldn't be able to have on an exam, but it's very, very helpful, and hopefully by the end of this whole process, you kind of have this memorized. So I'd say this is the stuff that you do need to know right here, okay? The names of the monomers of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins, and the polymers of them, and then also how glucose could become a carbohydrate polymer, how glucose could become a fat polymer, and how glucose could become a protein polymer, okay? All right. So let's look at the first scenario. This is the one we went over in class today. And let's just read through it, because there's a lot at once. And so I think it's always helpful to go back to the directions. The first one is, let's just read the scenario. So the scenario is building a plant. A peanut plant is making seeds, so just new peanuts. And it needs to make a high-energy fat molecule. So it's making a high-energy fat molecule where the new seed is growing. So this is where the new seed is growing. So I'm going to underline what it's making and kind of circle where this is all happening. So where the new seed is growing, well, that's just the peanut, right? Before the peanut can build the fat molecules, it needs to convert glucose made during photosynthesis into lipid monomers. All right. So I'm going to answer these questions down here just to kind of get my bearings straight. So my scenario involves, well, glucose is a carbohydrate, but it looks like I'm making a high-energy fat molecule, and I know fat is going to be a lipid. So I'm going to circle lipids here. That's really what I'm focusing on, or at least that's my end result of this whole process. I'm going to try to zoom in a little bit just to make it a little bit clearer for you guys, now that we're really just working on this now. All right. And then it says, are the monomers needed for your chemical change available, or do they need to be converted first? So it looks like we're making glucose, and if we look at this sheet right here, we know we're going to make a fat, and the monomer of a fat is not glucose, so it looks like something has to happen before we get the monomers of our lipids. So it looks like, yeah, like we need some, it's not available right away, we need to do some converting. So we've read the scenario. To the right, model where the reactants come from and where the products go. All right, so again, I'm just going to use the scenario here. You don't have to memorize all the stuff of like, oh, like where does the glucose come from to make a peanut, and where does it go and everything. Each scenario is going to be different. But what we could do is we could use the guide, and let's just say we didn't know what part does photosynthesis. We could read through, and it says photosynthesis uses light energy and uses atoms and water and CO2 to make glucose, and O2 is a product. So I know that if the plant's making glucose, that's my kind of my starting ingredient for my scenario, that it's going to do it in the leaf. So I'm just going to draw a dot here. And I'm going to just say reactants. Or in this case, I guess it's a reactant. It's just glucose. And then in my scenario, it says that this glucose is going to where the seed is growing. So it's going to the peanut. So I'm just going to circle this in terms of like where the process is going down. And glucose needs to get there. So it's going to travel from the leaf once it's made. It might go down this stem right here. Kind of took the long way to get to that peanut. But either way, it's going through the stem, and that glucose is going to travel through the peanut. And then it says in the scenario that we're making a fat molecule. So I know that those products are going to be right here in my peanut. So products, fat. Now notice that I drew an arrow because the glucose is traveling to the peanut. I drew a line here because this is telling me that my products are just going to be found in my peanut. All right? So there's a difference between just drawing a line and then drawing an arrow. Okay. So we've drawn our model, number 2. Next thing we've got to do is actually draw our model of what's happening with the molecule. So here, I know that I need to make a fat in my products, and I'm going to start off with glucose. I can look here too, and remember, eventually you're going to have to memorize this, but we're like, okay, we need to make a fat molecule, and we're going to use these as our building blocks, but we're starting off with glucose, so it looks like there's going to be something that happens beforehand, right? We're going to be needing to do some converting. So if that's the case, I'm going to draw a dotted line down here, and I'm just going to write beforehand. And it looks like in our drawing that in order to make a fat molecule, we need 4 glucose molecules. So I'm going to draw 4 small hexagons. Now, by the way, for this beforehand scenario, you'll notice on page 3, right, that it's a little bit more detailed where we have the H's and the OH's. For the beforehand part, don't worry about it. Just kind of in general say, like, all right, we got our hexagons, we got our glucose molecules, and then those are going to break down. So the glucose breaks down a bit. And once it breaks down, we can look at our sheet. It's going to, those parts, those atoms or chunks of the molecules are going to reform, and they're going to make a glycerol molecule. And, oh, nope, nothing there. So glycerol with just an H attached, an H, an H. So don't worry about this thing. That's a typo on my part. I got ahead of myself. I was about to draw a fat molecule. And remember, how I know how to draw the glycerol is, it tells me right here on page 3. You got the H's coming off. And again, you will not need to memorize how to draw this on an exam. You wouldn't be given the names of these things, but I would at least show you how like all the shapes should look. Okay, so here's going to be my fatty acid. Another fatty acid, and another fatty acid. And again, I know how to draw these from page 3 in my guide specifically, and I know that this needed to happen beforehand because on the last page of my guide, it shows that if I want to make a fat, glucose has to be broken down and rebuilt into the building blocks of fats, this glycerol and the 3 fatty acids first. All right, so now it's going to go through a chemical change, and I can look back at my guide, and it looks like I need to make a fat, and it's going to look like this glycerol with these 3 fatty acids. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, instead of just drawing this all at once, I'm going to kind of go through how this process would happen, where I have my glycerol, but notice here that it has these H's, and here it doesn't. So what happens, well, we could also, it looks like in the guide, model water as well. And so in order to get this glycerol to attach to this fatty acid, this OH right here, these atoms, and this atom, this H at the end, they kind of need to get knocked off in order to connect them. So this H is going to get knocked off over here, and this OH is going to get knocked off on my fatty acid. And those atoms are actually going to come together and make a water molecule. All right, so now that these guys are gone, my fatty acid could attach to the glycerol. And now that same exact thing is going to happen to each fatty acid, where the OH gets cleaved off, this H gets cleaved off, it makes another water molecule, and then this fatty acid could attach. Again, this OH part and this H part, they're going to get knocked off. They're going to form another water molecule, and my fatty acid could attach to my glycerol. So it looks like I have a fat molecule drawn. All right. Really quickly, notice that this molecule does show that mass can't be created or destroyed. I have 1 trapezoid here, 1 trapezoid there, 1, 2, 3 rectangles, 1, 2, 3 rectangles are fatty acids. And then if I count my H's, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on this side, and then oxygens, 1, 2, 3 oxygens, and then 1, 2, 3 oxygens over there. All right, so I've made my model. Now, it can be really, really easy to kind of zoom into like certain parts of this. The whole goal of this model is to really just tell the big picture of what's happening here, and so we could really help wrap that up with a caption. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit, or at least kind of move over here. And so the caption says, let's block some of it and kind of go in steps. Summarize the chemical change that happens in the scenario. Make sure to include all these words in the word bank, and then most importantly, address why this happens, why this process happens. Okay. So I'm going to start off with my first sentence right here. Glucose molecules are made in photosynthesis. Really easy, right? I'm kind of like starting right here. If I look at my model, it starts with glucose. How is it made? I know it's made in photosynthesis. I know that I needed to use that word, so I got glucose and photosynthesis used in my word bank. Okay. So then I'm going to kind of look at the rest of my model, whether it's right here or up here, and it looks like, okay, glucose was made, and in my word bank, I needed to say where this process occurs, right here. So if I kind of zoom out at my bigger model, it looks like that glucose goes to the peanut. So I'm going to say that. I'm going to say these glucose molecules then travel to the little peanut, where they are converted into glycerol and 3 fatty acids. So really quickly, I'm just saying that they travel to the peanut. I've now talked about where this has happened, and then I go on to talk about the specific terms for the monomers and polymers. So the specific term for the monomers of a fat are the glycerol and the fatty acids. So that's what I said, where they are converted into glycerol and 3 fatty acids. Right, so then I need to talk about the second part of my model right here, is that these monomers combine to form a fat molecule. Right? All I'm doing here is I'm just describing what I see in this model and this model. That's it. Okay. So there we go. I've hit almost everything, at least everything in my word bank, right? I've used the specific terms for monomers and polymers. I've said where it happens. I've talked about glucose and photosynthesis. But notice that right here, this is important. You have to talk about why this process goes down. So I just kind of made an extra box right here, and I even like bolded it. Why? Just so we don't forget. This process happens to help create the storage energy for a growing peanut, right? That fat is going to carry a bunch of high energy bonds that could be used for later. All right. So there we go. Hopefully this example helps in terms of going about modeling. And thanks for watching.